The signal disappeared without warning. Messages vanished into static. Units stopped moving, unsure of orders. Confusion spread faster than the enemy. Every step forward became a risk. The division faced the unknown as it advanced toward a critical crossroads near Corentin. Orders were unclear. Radios crackled and fell silent. Runners carried messages across muddy fields under constant threat, but many never returned. The men relied on signals that were failing, leaving them in uncertainty. The area was riddled with dense hedgerows and sunken roads. These natural obstacles disrupted communication. Tanks and half-tracks moved cautiously, but signals could not keep up. Small patrols often returned from reconnaissance missions with contradictory reports. Commanders could not verify positions. Every decision required guesswork. The troops were exhausted. Weeks of fighting since the Normandy landings had worn them down. Trenches were hastily dug. Artillery positions were marked on maps that were outdated or incomplete. Officers shouted into empty air. Radios sputtered with static. Coordination, the backbone of any operation, was slipping away. Intelligence suggested that German armored units were moving nearby. Reconnaissance planes spotted enemy vehicles, but by the time the information reached the front, it was often too late. Units were left holding positions they had no orders to defend. Others advanced into dangerous terrain expecting reinforcements that would not arrive. Confusion replaced clarity. The local landscape added to the problem. Hedgerows hid enemy positions. Sunken lanes prevented vehicles from moving quickly. Even when units tried to communicate visually, flares and signals were misread or missed entirely. Each failed attempt magnified tension. Soldiers began to doubt the competence of the chain of command, not realizing that the real problem was the lost signal itself. As dawn approached, uncertainty grew. Men peered across open fields, expecting support. None came. Orders were delayed. Some units hesitated. Others acted independently. Small skirmishes broke out, unplanned and uncoordinated. The division, which was meant to act as a cohesive force, began to fracture into isolated pockets. The first cracks of disaster were forming quietly, almost imperceptibly. There was no dramatic explosion or immediate catastrophe, only a creeping disintegration of command. Soldiers who had trained to follow orders now relied on instinct. Each choice carried unseen danger. The stage was set. The chaos had only just begun. As the morning wore on, the consequences of lost communication became painfully clear. Units advanced into unknown terrain. Some moved too far, others held back. Orders were missed or misunderstood. Soldiers acted on guesswork. The enemy watched and waited. Reconnaissance reports trickled in, incomplete and contradictory. Artillery support targeted the wrong coordinates. Some positions were hit by friendly fire. Confusion grew. Messengers ran across fields under fire. Many never returned. Radios that worked sporadically only added to the chaos. Officers shouted into static, hoping someone would respond. Decisions had to be made quickly, yet no one knew the full situation. Small units became isolated. Troops expected reinforcements that never arrived. Others believed they were surrounded. Every maneuver carried risk. Soldiers began improvising, moving where they thought it was safe. The plan no longer existed. Enemy forces exploited the confusion. German troops fired from concealed hedgerows. They ambushed isolated companies. Tanks that were supposed to provide support were stranded. Crews waited for orders that never came. Ammunition and supplies lagged behind. Some men scavenged from abandoned vehicles. Others dug shallow foxholes, praying to survive. Officers tried to regroup fragmented units. Signals flares were fired, but meanings were misread or ignored. Attempts to coordinate counterattacks failed. Every misstep compounded the problem. Soldiers could see comrades fall, yet they could not communicate with the rest of the division. Panic was spreading quietly. Fear and exhaustion weighed on every man. By midday, the battlefield resembled a patchwork of isolated engagements. Some troops were cut off entirely. Others retreated unnecessarily, believing they were alone. Friendly units collided by mistake. The once coordinated operation had fractured. Commanders struggled to regain control, but the lost signal had already done its damage. Even the terrain worked against them. Hedgerows concealed both friend and foe. Sunken roads slowed movement. Vehicles became trapped. Soldiers tried to maintain order, but the lack of reliable communication left them vulnerable. Small victories were overshadowed by the growing disaster. Every attempt to clarify orders only revealed further gaps. Units moved in different directions. The enemy pressed forward where the Allied line was weakest. Confusion and fear ruled the battlefield. Each decision carried life or death consequences. What had begun as a carefully planned advance was now a series of isolated struggles. By late afternoon, it was evident the division was losing cohesion. The consequences of lost communication were irreversible. The stage was set for the disaster that would follow. What could have been a decisive advance was now teetering on the brink of collapse. By late afternoon, the division was in disarray. The crossroads near Corentin had only been partially secured. Some units were surrounded. Others were cut off entirely. Tanks and half-tracks waited for orders that never came. Artillery support was missing. Soldiers looked around, unsure of friend or foe. The enemy pressed relentlessly. German troops emerged from concealed hedgerows. They fired from multiple directions. Small pockets of Allied soldiers tried to respond, but coordination had collapsed. Units that were supposed to support each other became isolated. Some fought desperately. Others froze in place, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Orders were attempted again and again. Radio signals flickered but were too weak to reach most units. Messengers ran across open fields. Some were struck down. Others returned with the wrong information. Officers shouted into the air. Soldiers attempted to regroup, but the battlefield was already fragmented. Every move carried extreme risk. Casualties mounted. Small groups were destroyed or scattered. Supplies and ammunition were trapped in mud or abandoned vehicles. Men ran low on food and water. Medics struggled to reach the wounded. Confusion reigned. Commanders tried to maintain order, but it was slipping through their fingers. By evening, the division had lost nearly all cohesion. The planned operation to secure the corridor had failed. Units retreated in a disorganized fashion. Enemy forces exploited every weakness. Some soldiers disappeared entirely into the hedgerows. Others were taken prisoner. The battlefield became a patchwork of destruction. Smoke and fire marked the areas of heaviest engagement. The loss of communication had turned a coordinated maneuver into chaos. Soldiers could see comrades fall but could not warn others. Artillery fired blindly. Tanks moved without direction. Every decision, made without reliable information, resulted in more danger. Panic spread quietly, under the surface. The strategic objective was lost. What had been a meticulously planned advance ended in fragments. Small victories existed only in isolated pockets. but they could not be connected. Hours of preparation were erased. The division that had left the landing beaches with high hopes now staggered into the evening, battered and confused. Maps later would show positions that no longer existed. Reports would document chaos and loss. Survivors would struggle to recall details. Names and faces were already fading from memory. The enemy withdrew later, but the operation itself had been destroyed by something as simple, yet devastating, as a failed signal. The battlefield fell silent. The men who survived retreated under cover of darkness. Vehicles and equipment were abandoned. Nothing remained but broken lines and empty trenches. The consequences of lost communication had reached their peak. Everything had fallen apart. Night fell over the battlefield. Silence replaced the chaos. The division had withdrawn. Men moved quietly, avoiding open ground. Some were never seen again. Trenches were abandoned. Vehicles lay in mud. Supplies were left behind. Radios were still silent. Commanders could only hope their orders had reached anyone. The crossroads at Corentin returned to stillness. Hedgerows hid empty foxholes. Smoke from earlier skirmishes lingered faintly. The fields were scarred but quiet. No one came to reclaim the lost ground immediately. Survivors tried to account for their men. Names were missing. Faces were gone. Reports were filed, but confusion made them unreliable. Maps would later show positions that no longer existed. Units were marked where no one remained. The battle had dissolved into fragments. Time passed, and memory faded. Few historians mention the incident. Those who survived rarely spoke of it. The events slipped from collective memory. Letters, diaries, and reports became the only remnants. Even they told an incomplete story. The signal that had failed remained a silent witness. Its loss had shattered plans, dispersed men, and left the operation unfinished. The consequences of lost communication could not be reversed. Fields grew over abandoned trenches. Mud hardened around deserted vehicles. The quiet was absolute. Nothing remained but the emptiness of what had been. The men, the orders, and the struggle faded. The memory of that day vanished into the silence of history. The division moved on. The war continued. But this disaster remained largely forgotten. The signal was lost, and with it, everything else. If this story mattered to you, consider subscribing. More forgotten history is coming.